Well, what a provocative title, huh? Beating a small horse to death. I chose that because I decided tonight to relate an anecdote from the novel that I'm reading, which is War and Peace by Dostoevsky. As I mentioned yesterday, this author tends to write his stories almost like a playwright in terms of setting a scene. Hey, Claudius, you are the first. Setting a scene, putting some characters in the scene, and then having something transpire, often with a moral. Hello, Ert. Hi, Reese. Right back at you. I think one of the things that makes Dostoevsky so great is his ability to set his characters at deep discussions, discussions that ask the really interesting, pressing questions, such as does God exist, as was explored in the Brothers Karamazov, which took me 50 years to read. Not quite that long. I tried to read it when I was 18 or 19, and I couldn't. It was just too much for me then. And later took up, just after turning 50, and kept the book around. It wasn't until this last year that I finally finished it. Well worth the effort. But I needed almost mature to the point of being able to consume that book. Hello, Hensuke, good to see you. So, in Crime and Punishment, we follow this story of Raskolnikov, who is a young student in Petersburg. Of course, this is in the 19th century, and he is struggling to get by, to say the least, failing at it, is better put, living a life of another thing that Dostoevsky explores in this book is the difference between poverty and destitution. Living a life of poverty, but closing in on destitution. What book is this? Sorry, I may have missed it. It's called Crime and Punishment. Yes, Crime and Punishment by the author Dostoevsky is his last name, Russian author. Great author, incredible writer. This is my second of Dostoevsky's tomes that I have undertaken. Each of his books is about that thick. This particular book, Crime and Punishment, is, imagine how it's so deep and it's so intense. Imagine my surprise to learn that it was his second attempt, that the first book he wrote, the first version of Crime and Punishment, that he was dissatisfied with and he burned the whole thing and started over. But anyway, in the chapter that I read today, which deals with Raskolnikov's, he's basically struggling. Crime and Punishment is all about a single crime, namely the murder of an old woman by this young student, Raskolnikov, and his subsequent being captured, and the punishment that he goes through as a result of the murder. But which is a pretty straightforward story. You can make a nice, simple page turner off of that. But Dostoevsky, in the course of this, sets at odds the ideas of good and evil, of right and wrong, contrasted with the desperate family on the verge from poverty into destitution, on that edge, versus the wealthy old woman who is, the world frankly would be better off without her. She's just so bad. So the killing of the one in order to help lift the other and in turn lift society. So is that a payoff? Is that what's the morality of all of that? Now, of course, this was in the time of Russian skepticism, right? In that part of the world, where it was scholarly and fanciful and almost fashionable to not believe in God. So, which is interesting because that opens the door to the exploration of the concept and of the idea of the question of a universe without a deity, namely without the Judeo-Christian deity. So, like I said, he creates these little stories, sets a setting, puts the characters into it, lets them play around a little bit, posing questions, having interesting dialogue, and then it leaves you kind of wondering, it leaves you thinking, and then moves on to the next one. In the brothers Karamazov, that was mainly between the two brothers Alosha and Ivan, Alosha being an acolyte priest in training, an innocent younger brother, yet fully embodied with the spirit and the belief, and even all the trappings, and even following the elderly priest in his ways. And then Ivan being the more worldly, secular rascal, who questions it, and from whose lips, I believe, came the famous quote from Dostoevsky, without God all things are permitted. So very interesting. So I'm interested now to see that same type of question is being brought to bear in Crime and Punishment, which was an interesting thing from a man, Dostoevsky, who was in fact quite a believer in his own right, and his strength and his faith only increased as he aged. So here's the thing. So far, I'm about 60 pages into this book, and it's a big, thick one. The name of the book is Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. I'm into it about that far, and so far in this book, I've had 3 episodes that really shook me up. I mean, the type of shake-up that you get when you watch a documentary on the Holocaust, and kind of leaves you shaken and kind of broken afterwards. You watch it and you're like, man, it's like someone took you out and gave you a pardon the term, a horsewhipping, right? But a mental horsewhipping where you came out, and forgive me, I shouldn't have used that because what I'm going to talk about is horsewhipping. You come out in the end, broken, a little bit broken, kind of could have done without that, can't see, unsee it, but it was for the good. That's what it's like to read a novel by Dostoevsky. Now keep in mind, this was a man that was almost executed, Dostoevsky, the writer. He was, in fact, he actually wrote a book about this. He was, in fact, for his contrary thinking to the Tsar, tied to a stake, and as the gunners were about to shoot him, just about to say, ready, aim, a pardon came flying in at the last moment, very dramatic, and he was pardoned and released. And he wrote a whole book about that called The Idiot, wherein the concept of the idiot was basically if you have that moment where you are inches, seconds away from death, and the liberation comes, the rest of your life is spent in kind of a fanciful wonder, despite whatever trial or tribulation might come your way. You find yourself taking it all in a certain type of stride and ease because you have faced death so eminently and have escaped it. That's the concept of the idiot. So I guess no wonder that in his later literary career, because he started pretty late in his life, long after these other events occurred, that he would explore these deep topics. So like I said, 60 pages into what a 800, maybe it's more, 900-page book, and already 3 times I've had incidents that really shook me up. I'll leave you to read the book to get the first 2, but the one that just happened just now, and I only finished it, the incident, I only finished the little story part about it, really shook me up. It'd be interesting to see what Dostoevsky is going to do with this. He says, do you think it's about being close to death or accepting it? Perhaps. Okay, so you're asking, what is it? Is it about being close to death or accepting it? What is it that you're causing him to have that nonchalance of life that he had? If that's what you're referring to, I think that was, of course, it. It'd be interesting to see. I wondered how he accepted it. I've got to read The Idiot because he talks about it. I don't know that, although he recounts it's autobiographical to the extent that it built off of his own experience. I wonder how much of it is fiction. But a lot of the stuff that he writes about is leveraged from his own life. For example, this anecdote that I'm about to say about the whipping a horse to death comes from Dostoevsky's personal life, or at least it's part of the trappings of a dream that he had, that in the footnotes of the book I read are, in a sense, reflective of his childhood. So here's the thing. Raskolnikov is destitute, as I said. He's a student. He's struggling. He's got a mother and a sister at home who are also struggling and who are making their lives worse by trying to send him money to keep him going. Mother's borrowing from her pension, and the daughter is preparing to wed a man, a desperately. It's interesting. I wouldn't call him vicious. All I know him from is the letter that the mother wrote describing him. But Raskolnikov gains from the letter right away, apprehends that this is not a man her sister should marry, that she's marrying him simply so that for the possible gains that he might be able to provide him, stabilizing the family and getting Raskolnikov through school and on to a better life. Everything in Russia at this point is all about station in life. So it's very important that he finish this school, go from being a student, maybe becoming a minister in one of the 14 levels of the Tsarist ministries. Anyway, I detract. In the midst of all of that, he finds himself wandering the mean streets of Petersburg. And it's interesting how in the book he actually doesn't name the streets. He just kind of does if it's Thurgood Street, it would be Thurgood, good Russian name, right? let's say I don't know, Ivanhoe Street or something like that. He would just put the I and then take off the rest. And scholars have later pieced it together. He was basing it on the real geography or the landscape or the streetscape of Petersburg, but he hid the names. But later scholars have recreated it. I saw a comment. Hence K2. I used to be a pretty avid reader when I was younger, not so much now. You make me feel like I should get back into it. It's, for me, the very best use of time besides spending time with my family. Yeah, so reading is very important to me. Although I'm a very slow reader, I'm a very busy person, a lot of work, working 2 jobs, raising a family, so I don't get much time to read. But when I do have free time, I read. It's very important to me. But back to the tale. He has a couple of really bad experiences, Raskolnikov. He's received a letter from his mother, who is hoping that it will be good news, that the sister has found a man, a good man, or at least good in terms of worldly possessions, that will take care of them and allow him to continue his studies. But Raskolnikov loves his sister, and he doesn't want her to have to go through with this. This is part of the thing that's leading him up towards the act of murder that he's soon going to commit in killing the old woman, the miserly, evil, for lack of a better term, old woman that the world could do better without, that if he could just murder her and steal from her, then he could get the whole family out of this situation and relieve all of the people under whose thumb she resides, right? So this is one more piece of desperation that's leading him. So Dostoevsky is building towards the motive. He goes to sleep. He actually falls asleep on a bench in a park, near a park, at the entrance of a park, where another one of those head-shaking scenes takes place with a young woman and a sexual predator and a policeman who intends good, but who Dostoevsky cynically suggests might turn to evil. And even Raskolnikov himself at the end even though he's trying to do good and rescue this young woman from the clutches of these evil men, or this evil man and this man who may be vulnerable to falling, at the end he gives in himself, and though he does nothing, he makes some utterances that are very illustrative of the conflict within, between the devil and the angel on the shoulder. So then he lays down on the bench. He's thoroughly whacked. Then he has a dream, and it's a dream from his boyhood, a very dream that might be representative of Dostoevsky's own childhood, in which he's with his father, and he's walking through the village where they grew up, and he passes the church, and he passes a few places that he remembers. He's holding his father's hand, and he passes a place that he remembers with negative memory. It's like a tavern, an inn in the village, a place where the real ruffians of the village come together, always with loud noise and drunkenness and boisterous fighting, and just the type of place where people go and indulge their other side, and where alcohol only furthers that and the like. And he's passing with his father, and he's clutching his father's hand because he's just a boy, and he wants to get past, but then a scene catches his eye, and this is where it gets very difficult. I had a tough time with this. He describes that there's a cart in front of the tavern. A lot of people outside laughing and coughing and all that stuff. There's a cart, big cart, one of the big cart that is usually pulled by a very heavy draft horse, you know, a big Clydesdale type of an animal, you know, heavy of shoulder, strong of limb, you know, very weighty, and you may put two of those in front of that heavy cart, and you can stack that cart with as much of whatever you want, heavy wheels, heavy axle, it can take it. And those big horses, those big draft horses can, as a pair, drive it along. Now the owner of the cart is there. He's been drinking, and he's got attached to the cart not one of these heavy work horses, but a small household. Maybe not a pony, but just a small household horse, small normal character. What's worse, it's a mare or a female horse. What's worse is it's young. I mean, it's old. It's an old horse, old, kind of weak, small, certainly not fitting. It would be like trying to ask a small, demure, you know, teenage girl to get under or an old woman to get under the big barbell at the gym with all the weights and, you know, try to lift that up. Imagine this little horse to try to pull the cart. So that's the scene that the son and the father see as they're walking past the tavern at a distance, and there's a group of people, and there's the cart, and there's the small horse attached to the giant cart, and the owner there is trying to enliven the mood of everybody with a game. And he jumps up on the cart, and he summons others, and he says, everybody, as many as you can, gather, get on the cart. And Koyoko Otaku says, "Hello, Kurt, I read the title. It's so sad, that poor horse." Don't worry too bad, it's fiction, although maybe not too much fiction, because the author of the tale, Dostoevsky, may be relating a memory from his childhood. And Koei Otaku and any others, that if you are sensitive about this type of stuff, maybe you don't want to listen to the rest. It's quite upsetting, even though it is fiction, hopefully. So the owner of the cart and the horse is summoning people to climb on board. And other big men, burly men, are climbing on board, heavy guys, and you know, they grab this one woman, and she gets on, and she's cracking peanuts and eating it and laughing and having a good time, and they've got everybody packed on. And the owner decides, he says, is what we're going to do, everybody, for entertainment, is we are going to make this horse gallop, carrying this cart and all of us in it. We're going to see this horse. Now imagine this little decrepit little old mare. I don't know if I'm using the right word term, mare, I'm using it for a female horse, you know, kind of there. She's probably already been dragging the cart around slowly with the master, the cruel master, to get there. Who knows what shape she's in. And he says, we're going to get this little horse to gallop while carrying the big heavy cart and all of us on it. And he gets his whip ready, and he gets to whipping it a little bit. And he says, here we go. And it's a big build-up. He talks about it, talking, and it's setting the stage. And in your mind, as you're reading this, and as the boy is walking past, he must be just building the anxiety. Oh my God, he's going to abuse this horse. He's going to whip this horse to cause it to do something that it's probably incapable of doing. And you're hoping all along that maybe something will happen to step in. Someone will stop this from happening. Well, here we go. He begins to whip the horse, wha-bam, on its back, wha-bam, and the little mare is, you know, reacting and starts to move forward at a very slow, creeping pace, trying to pull this big cart with all the big men in there and that one woman eating peanuts, and they're kind of laughing, and everybody's kind of laughing, and all the bystanders are watching and laughing, you know, at the effort, right? The straining horse in the cart, and it gets, bam, whipping harder and harder. Giddy up, giddy up. Kind of like the Russian translation of, it's translation from the Russian of giddy up. And then he's got sticks. Some people start gathering sticks, and they're giving it to other men in the cart. And now 2 or 3 men have whips. I guess they're whips from other carriages. And there are 2 or 3 men now are whipping at the horse. Bam! And they're all hitting it and then trying to get it to go. And the horse is visibly disturbed, and it's trying its best to get it along. And everybody's laughing. Meanwhile, they're hauling more people up. Hello, Bilbo Baggins. Hi, Kurt. Hello. And they're hauling more people up. And now, from here, it just escalates. People start to, a few more men come from the sides with big sticks, and now they're sticks and whips, and now there are people in the cart, and there's people on the side, and they're all whipping the horse together. from all sides. The horse has no respite, there's no protection, there's no succor, there's no safety, there's nothing. It's just desperate. The man, they're still not getting it to gallop. In fact, the horse is getting slower because it's being abused and beaten, and of course things aren't good. So now the owner of the horse begins to take up a new course of action. He says, everybody, let's whip it on the face, whip it on the snout, whip it on the eyes, hit its eyes, get all of its sensitive area up front so we can really get this horse to go. So they start whipping it on and just then an old man kind of comes to everybody, and he kind of peeks through, and he says, have you no fear of God? And then the man looks around at him, and they continue whipping, wham, wham, all sides, and they're whipping at the snout and the muzzle and the eyes, and the boy is just beginning to break down. He's holding his father's hand. He can't believe what he sees. He's pleading with his father. What are we going to do? They're going to kill that horse. And the father simply says, they're drunk. They're making mischief. Let's just carry on. We'll continue walking. Don't look. Just keep on going. Now, the horse is beginning to stop at this point. It's being abused on all sides, even on its face, eyes, everything. So the man now, he jumps down and he grabs a giant club, this big burly man that's the owner of the horse. And other people I remember what he responded. He responded to the man that said, have you no fear of God? He simply said, this is my possession. This horse is my possession. Keep out of it, right? Now he's got this big club, and he comes over and he starts wailing on the horse, on its back. Bam! And the horse is staggering. This little female horse is staggering and stumbling, and it tries to kick, and it can't quite kick, and he just bam, and he's just kicking on it, and it's not working. And so he implores a few others to get sticks, big logs as well, and they all start pounding on the horse, just beating on the horse. Still, the horse is still standing, and then the man gets an iron rod and just takes into the horse's face, just pounding on the face of the horse, on its eyes and face. I told you this is bad. I was reading this and quite shook up over my lunch break today. And then finally the horse falls down, and it's kicking and kind of jerking along, and the man comes up and delivers the death blow into the face. And finally the horse goes dead. And just then the boy breaks loose from his father and runs through the crowd and comes up to the horse and right up grabs its face and kisses its face and kisses its broken eyes and its muzzle and the like. And he's just so broken down, and his father comes over and grabs his hand and pulls him away. And just then the old man once more speaks up, Have you no fear of God? And that's where I had to stop, because I had to get back to work. So I don't know what Dostoevsky is going to do with this anecdote. Typically, these things set the stage for a moral dilemma. I think, of course, the moral dilemma being, in this case, the idea, again, of morality in absence of a deity, right? What would have you no fear of God, being the idea that if you were a God-fearing man, you would certainly not do such a thing. Randy says, humans can be so grotesque in their behavior while others look on in horrid awe and love. Yeah. Which, as I was wrapping things up, washing my dishes, doing it, I can't wait to continue the chapter and see where this is going to go. Bear in mind, all that was fiction if you came in late, right? It was just hopefully fiction. It's just part of a book that I read. I had the question, I had to ask myself, have you no fear of God? The implication being that if you have no fear of God, then anything goes, just as Ivan in The Brothers Karamazov suggested, right? If there is no God, then anything is permitted. If you fear no God, then you can mutilate and destroy an animal without fear of repercussion. But I think that clearly that is a false premise. I need look no further than myself, and to say that I have no fear of God. I believe God does not exist. Yet such behavior is abhorrent to me, and I couldn't imagine permitting, of course, myself, but not less anybody else, not without stepping in and interfering, if such a circumstance were to happen. And some might say that that's because that's an artifact of my society, my God-fearing society that I've grown up in, that I've gained that as kind of like a drafting along behind, those principles and picked them up by myself. But I don't attribute them to that, and there's probably some truth to that. Probably is some truth that I picked that through osmosis in my society. I don't necessarily think that that's necessarily a factor of any particular religion, but more a quality of our species, the golden rule. But more importantly for me now, I've actually thought it through and codified my principles in my book, right? There's a whole chapter which lays out about 30 principles that I hold on to. And one of those is the principle of the principle of purpose. My purpose is my second purpose, 3 of them. The first purpose is to raise my daughter to a viable age when she's healthy and able to go on. The second purpose, the one I'm going to refer to, is the principle of well-being, purpose of well-being, right? Of encouraging the well-being, where well-being is basically you could boil it down to the happiness, but not necessarily just happiness, but basically the health, vitality, the happiness of myself, my other human beings and creatures around me, just making things better. That principle alone would prevent me from striking an animal in such a way, or even standing by while somebody else did it. So, have you no fear of God? I would probably change that question to have you no principle of good? Have you no principle of well-being? Have you no principle of happiness? Have you no principles period? Because I would think that a good set of principles would revolve themselves around the orbit of well-being in the end. Interesting comparison with Nietzsche, who witnessed a horse being whipped and ran over to protect it while having a mental breakdown. Interesting, really. Randy says, I have passed on this book my whole life. I'm now motivated to pick it up. Thank you, Kurt. Yeah, Randy. It's a very good use of time. Great literature. Wow. So many ways to waste our time. So many ways to distract ourselves from the depths of life, from the great indifference. Really good use of distraction, or good use of time is reading good books. And with that, I think I'll go ahead and stop. My wife should be home any moment. My daughter is out with her boyfriend, and interesting, she came to me today. She had a bit of a moral dilemma. Not that type of moral dilemma, but more of an ethical dilemma. And we had a good talk. And basically I suggested to her that you can't really adjust others. You can, even if you want them to, even if you want them to be different. But what you can do is know your own principles and stand upon them if they be reasonable, and let other people know that this is where I'm going to stand. You do you. I'm going to be here, but there are consequences, right? If you're doing things that I would judge to be not in the interest of well-being, then my regard for you, or even my choice to interact with you, may change. So we had a good talk along those lines, and I'm really happy to see that things seem to work out. And she did stand upon her principles. Good girl that she is. Good young woman that she is. Kawi Otako says, even though this was a sad story, I would rather hear your stories in order to take a break from life. Yes, we all need a little break from life sometimes, don't we? And yes, I'll leave it at that. Life is tricky. Dostoevsky says, yes, the Nietzsche story is often compared to this. Interesting. Dostoevsky says most assume he was inspired by Dostoevsky's story in some way. Interesting, because Dostoevsky's story may have been inspired by a poet. I can't remember the name of the poet. Probably what they consider the most famous. It was in the footnotes. It said one of the most famous Russian poets of all time has a poem talking about the whipping of a horse, and even includes the bits about the whipping about the face and the eyes. So this may have been, both Nietzsche and Dostoevsky may have been influenced by this poem, which apparently the footnote said the story really moved Dostoevsky. It was a very sensitive person, it appears to be, just as it moved me and maybe some of you in its hearing, and that he would reuse that as a vehicle in his own writing is interesting. Well, I'm going to wish you all well, and have a good night. Be safe, but not too safe, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.